Christmas is around the corner and we've been crafting up a storm. Hi creative friends, I'm Jane from Sustain My Craft Habit, and today we're so excited to share with you over 20 fun and festive upcycling ideas for Christmas. These projects use mainly thrift store finds as well as items from around the house that we've upcycled in time for the holidays. So let's get started. I found a pair of these water glasses at the thrift store for $5, and we're going to use them to make an adorable candle holder. I started by tracing around the rim of the glass onto a piece of cardboard paper. I tried using my scissors and then this utility knife, which worked best. I'd found this pack of adorable miniatures at Dollar Tree. It has a little horse-drawn sleigh and some lamps, and I paired that with a few bottle brush trees, just enough to fit onto the disc that we had cut out, and you'll want to just play with the arrangement beforehand to make sure everything fits on there. So once I was happy with the pieces that I had, I glued them right onto the disc to craft this adorable little scene. There are so many fun miniatures you can find at the craft store or the dollar store that you can use for this, or simply some bottle brush trees or other items to place inside. Once all the items are securely glued onto that disc, place them inside the opening of the glass and turn it upside down. We're going to use a little bit of this faux snow, also from Dollar Tree, and pour that right inside. I actually ended up using more than I needed, and it kind of buried my little horsey in the end, but just a little bit goes a long way for this. The next step then is to glue the bottom. Just gently go around with your hot glue gun and glue the rim, that cardboard piece, to the rim of the glass. I dressed up the edge of the cardboard with a little bit of this ribbon. It's kind of got pearls on there, and then also added a string of rhinestones around there, but really any ribbon. You could even use twine for this, just to kind of decorate and cover up that edge to make it look a little prettier. Now for the fun part, we simply turn the glass over and shake it around so that the snow settles to the bottom of the scene. And that's really it. You've crafted this adorable little candle holder. You can stick on there a votive or a nice large pillar candle. You can place some greenery and other embellishments as well if you'd like to decorate. But I just thought this makes such a fun little craft for Christmas. I found a pair of these metal trays at the Valley Village for $9.99, and it was just the perfect size to make this Silent Night themed craft that I had in mind with one of my Chalk Couture stencils. So I started by simply painting the inside flat surface of the tray with some black chalky paint and drying that completely. It actually needed a couple of coats to get that full coverage, so I went back and any of those lighter areas I painted again and then dried that. With a paper towel, I went around that edge to scrape off any of the paint that I hadn't been so careful about, just to clean it up a little bit. I must admit that I was a little bit worried that my stencil, when I pulled it up in a later step, was going to pull this black paint off of the platter. So to help prevent against that, I used my clear rubbing wax, which helps to, one, limit the amount of bleed through of the ink through the stencil, but two, also helps the stencil release from the surface. So I made sure to rub this wax on over the entire surface. It actually also had the nice side effect of raising or highlighting the embossing on the platter, which I wasn't expecting, and you can see that at the end of the video. But now we're going to use this Silent Night transfer. These are screen mesh transfers that are really intricate and beautiful from Chalk Couture. I'll be sure to link that below because, again, I wanted to make sure it wasn't too sticky. I used this teal fuzzing cloth several times to add a bit of fuzz to the back of the transfer, which helps to make sure that it's going to come off of the surface. After a little test lift to make sure that everything would work out okay, I went ahead and started chalking. So Chalk Couture has all these different colors of paste. I used their white one for this particular craft because I wanted it to contrast against the black surface, and I just love how this looks together, so crisp and clean. And basically I'm using the squeegee. There's different sizes of squeegee. This is one of my favorite sizes. It's not too big, and we will pass the paste over the stencil and through the mesh, and so when we lift up the stencil, you'll see the design underneath. Hey, did you know that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed? So if you end up liking this content, please be sure to hit that notification bell and subscribe so we can stay in touch. Now this chalk paste dries really quickly and you want to remove the stencil while the paste is still wet, so you do need to work a little bit quickly. But look how gorgeous this is. I think this is honestly one of my favorite transfers that I've done so far. We have some other videos of this process. If you're interested in learning more, they have beautiful designs and great perks programs for anybody who wants to get into Chalk Couture. We are almost done with this craft. I think it looks beautiful as it is, but I did decide to add some bling. I had these little embellishments from Amazon as well as this rhinestone chain. It was bothering me, that painted edge. It didn't look as clean as I wanted it to, so I went ahead and ordered some of this rhinestone. It was under $10 for 10 yards of it, and I have a lot left over for future crafts. I actually used this chain in the previous craft with the wine glass, but I use a little bit of Gorilla Glue and a fine paintbrush to basically paint the glue all the way around this edge, and I have a close-up of that here. And I just took my time and went around there. The nice thing with the Gorilla Glue is that it takes a couple of hours for it to set and dry, so you do have quite a bit of working time for this. Don't have to rush it too much, but once my bead of glue was on there, I gently placed this string of rhinestones and it fit perfectly in there. I went all the way around the edge, and it just added that needed touch to finish off the craft. I'm so in love with how this piece turned out. I think the combination of the silver with the black and white and then these rhinestones is just so elegant. I am going to be making more of them to give as gifts, especially to those who love Silent Night. So which is your favorite Christmas song? I think it was my mom who found this adorable sled at the thrift store for $3 back in the summer, and it was one of the first Christmas thrift store makeovers I embarked on this season. I used a napkin from Dollar Tree as well as some bells and this Jingle All the Way sign. I think I picked that up on clearance last year at Michael's. So that's something that I love to do, that Boxing Week sale where you can find things, or even through the beginning of January, for 80-90% off at Christmas time. And we think that, next Christmas is so far away, but here we are, and it's nice to have these items to be able to craft with now. So I started by painting the surface with my white chalky paint and letting that dry. For the keys or blades, what's this part of the sled called? We were going to do a crackle effect. So I started by painting it with my red chalky paint. You could use an acrylic paint for this as well. Just the under color that's going to peek through the crackle. We're going to do a white paint over top with the crackle. After drying the red paint, I applied a coat of Elmer's school glue over there and used my paintbrush to spread it around. If you go in different directions, it helps to form a more interesting crackle as well. And you want to work pretty quickly with this because we'll want to put our top coat of paint over this while the glue is still wet. This really helps to, again, create those great crackles. I applied a nice generous coat of my white paint over the glue, and you are really tempted to go back and forth, but the trick is to just go in one direction, one brush, and then leave it. And as the paint dries, I use my heat tool to help speed up the process. You'll see those crackles form in the paint, and it's just such a nice way to add that texture to a craft to give it that kind of vintage or distressed look. After repeating that with the other ski of the sled, I went back to the surface and applied a coat of Mod Podge over that, and I let that dry completely. We're going to iron on this pretty snowflake napkin on there, and so I simply took it down to the single ply and then spread that out over top. I placed a piece of parchment paper and used the heat from my little mini iron to press that napkin into that dried Mod Podge, and it's again my favorite, easiest way to do decoupage. and get a nice smooth wrinkle-free finish. After trimming the excess off of the napkin using a sanding block, you could use scissors for this or a little bit of sandpaper. I just used my nail to accentuate the little grooves of the sled. One of my little helpers came along to help me at this point, and she's my third of 4 kiddos, my 13-year-old, and loves to craft as well. So she was helping me on this day. Okay, now it's time to add some of our embellishments onto here. I had these red bells from Dollar Tree and strung them onto a little bit of wire. I think I used about 3 or 4 of them in total. I glued some of this faux greenery in place along the top and then added the bells on there. Now all this time my daughter was confidently crafting a bow to put on the top, and I must admit I was a little skeptical. I was trying not to discourage her from what she was making, but she was like, "I've got this, Mom. I know how to do this." I'm like, "Okay, let's see how it's gonna turn out." And you know what? She made the most beautiful bow. You'll see at the end, it turned out so nicely. We just had to fluff it up and play with it a bit. I had cut this little snowman out of another napkin and decoupaged that onto the bottom corner of the sled, and then painted the little jingle sign with some black paint. Once that was dry, I rubbed on a little bit of this gold metallic luster just along the edges to add a little bit more pizzazz to the piece, and then glued that in place. Finally, I added on the bow that my daughter had created. Look how beautiful. She did this double bow with the center and the tails. I think this ribbon came from Michael's last year on clearance, but it added the perfect touch to finish off our upcycled sled. These fuzzy scarves were all the rage about 10-15 years ago, and you might even have one in your closet. I picked up this one from the thrift store. You can find all sorts of different colored ones, but we're going to make a lovely Christmas wreath with this. I also have this raffia wreath form. I believe that came from a thrift store as well, and simply wrapped that scarf all the way around, gluing it in a few places as I went. This wreath was inspired by a more coastal themed one that I did a few years ago with a teal scarf, and we have the video for that here on our channel. It was very much the same technique of wrapping the wreath form around and gluing that scarf in place. I picked up a few cute ornaments from the dollar store, including this little bench and light up lamp in the miniature section, and affixed them in place. However, they were kind of flopping around, so I wasn't sure at first how to keep them all together, but then I strung some white ribbon along the back to just create another kind of connection point that I could affix everything together. After crisscrossing the ribbon a few times, I now had a nice backing surface to glue my bottle brush trees on there, and the bench and the little lanterns, and I just kept filling that in there until I was happy with how the arrangement looked. It looks like a cute little scene in the wreath. I also had this joy cut out and added some snowflakes and strung those in the middle of the wreath. Finally, I added a bow to the top with this red buffalo check ribbon and simply glued that in place. And there we go, a beautiful festive wreath for Christmas with just some upcycled and dollar store supplies. We're going to transform this piece of scrap wood into a cute little gnome. So I got this wood from my father-in-law's scrap wood pile, and I don't know why it has this point on it. I originally thought that we'd make like a Christmas house with it, but then this gnome idea came to mind. I started by painting the hat section with some red paint, and the idea was that this would peek through from underneath when we continued with the next sections. So once that was dry, I went over it with some white chalky paint all around the edges and the front and the back. Once that dried, I applied a layer of decoupage glue onto all the surfaces and then ironed on a different napkin pattern to each side of the hat. I used a bit of sandpaper to remove the excess napkin, and then some of this faux fur that I picked up at the dollar store to cover the bottom part of the scrap wood and create the gnome's beard. I glued in a wood bead for the nose and then added a little more fur. I don't know, I thought this was the mustache, but I guess it ended up the brows of the gnome. Finally, I added a few little embellishments just to dress up the hat, and that's it. We have reversible gnome decor for the holidays.
Come on, I need to hear you.
You could use any sort of round platter, even a pizza plate from the dollar store, to make this cute sign. I started by painting it with some white chalky paint and then letting that dry. I had this idea to create kind of a gray driftwood background, so I simply dry brushed the tray with different shades of gray paint and then dabbed on with a flat brush some more lighter and darker shades. This was really to sort of mimic the design in my napkin, the gray area, and I used this really pretty one with these cardinals. They are one of my favorite birds. I simply traced around each shape with a wet paintbrush and then ripped the napkin, the single ply of it, to get these individual designs and layered this together to create this pretty little scene. Next, I painted this red joy wood cutout and added some diamond dust and then glued that to the top along with some greenery. We're going to upcycle these little wooden stockings for our next craft. I cut out little templates just from paper for both the toes and the heel of each stocking and then painted the entire things with some white chalky paint. I'm going to decoupage different napkin designs onto each stocking. I cut out each design I was going to use roughly to size, and then I applied a coat of decoupage glue. You could use Mod Podge onto the surface of each one. I dried those and then simply placed my cutout designs on there and ironed it on with my heat tool. You've seen me use this technique now in a previous video, so it's a really simple way of getting a nice smooth finish. I repeated this process with 3 additional napkins, one for each of the other stockings. I then picked a contrasting plaid napkin and used those templates we had cut out at the beginning to cut little toes and heels, which I also decoupaged onto there. To finish off this upcycling project, I cut a little bit of faux fur to size to fit the cuff of each stocking and then glued that in place. And that was it. I have 4 new adorable stockings. I'm going to gift one to each of my 4 kids and write a little note on the back. I'd found a few containers of seashells at the thrift store and thought it'd be really fun to try to make a Christmas tree with them. So in addition to this cone, styrofoam cone, the seashells, I also used a mini clay pot and saucer. So this is actually simpler than I was thinking originally. I started by gluing some of the larger seashells along the sides of the cone. You can use a little bit of the heat from the hot glue gun to create small divots in the styrofoam and then press those seashells right in there. I used these little scallop shells, or they're about a medium size, and tried to pick ones that were similar in size, but really kind of rotated them as I went up and around the cone and put them in different angles and directions. And later we'll fill in the gaps with smaller shells and other embellishments. Of course, our tree needed some lights, so I used a package of these mini twinkle lights and wrapped them around, gluing them in place. In retrospect, these were a bright white. I wish they were more of a soft white color to go with the seashells, but I didn't really think about it until it was all done and too late. But it still looked really pretty. Once the lights were in place, I continued adding seashells to fill in all the little gaps. I had this string of faux pearls that I also added around the tree. And it just reminded me of kind of an under the sea theme with Ariel's grotto from The Little Mermaid and this string of pearls. Next, I layered in some of the different shaped seashells, like the spirals and the conches, mini conches, just again to cover up any of the exposed styrofoam. I'd found this perfect seashell for the top of the tree. It made like a little cone shape. And then I added in some of these gold glitter balls from a festive like faux floral pick. And they just help to add a little bit of sparkle to the tree, almost like little ornaments. To diffuse the string lights a bit, I glued on pieces of sea glass over top of each of the lights, which really helped to give it a pretty glow. And then finally, to finish it off, of course, we need a star on our tree. I brushed some decoupage glue onto the starfish and then sprinkled it with diamond dust to give it that sparkle and glued that to the top of the tree. Our seashell tree was pretty much done, but I wanted to make a cute little base for it. So I painted the saucer and the terracotta pot with my white chalky paint, dried that, applied a coat of decoupage glue, and then sprinkled it all with some white sand. So this was really fun to kind of tie in that beach theme. Finally, I glued the saucer to the bottom of the terracotta pot, or the top of it. It was turned upside down, and then glued my tree right on top of there. And that's how I used our seashell collection to make a beautiful glowing tree that I actually have displayed year-round on my piano. I think this also makes such a unique handmade gift for somebody who loves that coastal style. While I absolutely love how this sign turned out using my Chalk Couture stencils, I must admit it's one of those few pieces that I sort of regret having upcycled, because after sharing it online, I discovered that this was a vintage Florentine tray that is now a collector's item and can be found on Etsy for about $100. But I don't know, I didn't know at the time, and I really am in love with how this piece turned out. So what do you think? Did I make a mistake? We do a lot of decoupage with paper napkins, but for this craft I wanted to decoupage with fabric. So I picked up this tray from Valley Village and gave it a coat of white chalky paint as a base coat. The process for decoupaging with fabric is very similar to that of any paper. We applied a coat of this decoupage glue. Now, the only difference is that this glue is made to be used for fabric, which means it leaves the fabric a little more flexible at the end, so that you still know that it's fabric and not just a stiff paper. After applying and drying that coat of decoupage glue, we simply placed our fabric that was cut to size on top of that, and then used the heat from our mini iron to press that right into the glue. And now because I wanted to use this as a tray, I just applied a coat of that same decoupage glue as a sealer to seal everything up and protect it. And this way you can wipe it down if anything should spill on there or it gets dirty at all. This glue takes a little bit longer to dry, so it's best to leave it overnight to fully set. I wanted to add a little height to my tray, so I glued on these wood knobs for feet. Picked up a bag of these at the Valley Village as well. Finally, I painted the edge and the handles a little bit with some gold metallic paint. And that's our beautiful new tray that we can use as a gift or to display some Christmas goodies. Second upcycling project was so fun to do. Took this, I guess it was a shelf. The back is fabric lined, but it has a bit of a cushion, so I think it could be used as a pin board. There's a tag on the bottom that says it's from Target, and it was actually a set of two. I also have a smaller piece as well. I just started by painting the pink with a coat of white chalky paint, and then also painted the linen type fabric with paint as well. It didn't fully cover, but I actually really like the texture of how it looked. It looked like an old-time gypsum wall. Next, we built a little cozy fireplace with a little bit of cardboard cut to size, and then I painted on the hearth of the fireplace
and used some pebbles from the beach that we'd collected in the summer and glued those all around to create a really pretty fireplace mantle. I love all the different textures and different colors of these stones. And again, it gives it just a really lovely European farmhouse vibe. Once all the pebbles were in place, I glued the entire fireplace piece into the frame and then added on a driftwood mantle over the top. Next, I used some popsicle sticks to create a cute little sign to go above the fireplace. This barn came from a napkin that I just decoupaged on there and then glued a little bit of twine as hangers and put this over top of my fireplace. I also had this really sweet rocking chair from the dollar store, and then I painted a large pine cone white and added some diamond dust to make a tree to go in my little vignette. How cute is this little terracotta pot? And it made a really sweet little pot for my tree. I used a brush just to paint a buffalo check type of pattern really roughly, and it just added a cute bit of texture. I glued that in place, added the tree inside, and then continued building the display. I cut some of the faux fur and glued it in front of the fire to create a little sheepskin rug down there, and then cut a set of a cute little stockings from some buffalo plaid fabric with a little bit of that faux fur for the cuff of the top of the stockings, and I glued them onto the fireplace mantle.
What other elements would you add to this cozy Christmas display? We're thinking a chandelier, some decor for the mantle, and maybe even a little kitten. I love these little silver trays for upcycling. I don't know if it's silver, I think it may just be like a stainless steel, but it's the perfect little size to create a little vignette or use as a frame and decoupage in there a nice little scene. For this particular craft, for the next 3 projects, we're going to use this as our base and then add a few different elements in there. So this is really simple. We're simply going to paint the inside surface with our white chalky paint. This paint is great because it has really good adhesion. It's not going to peel up from the silver or the metal, and it also provides really good coverage. So once we've painted that coat on there, I'm simply drying it with my heat tool. And then we're going to place a napkin in there that will fit to cover the whole surface. I have this beautiful tartan design, and I'm just using the back side of the tray to help cut it to size. Trying to cut it from the inside always gets tricky, so I found this strategy works pretty well. I'm using a sanding block and just going around there and sanding the edges so that this should, in the end, this oval fit right inside. Now that we have our napkin cut out, we'll simply place it on the right side of the tray. I'm applying a coat of Mod Podge here and letting that dry completely. And then we'll simply iron our napkin in place. And that's pretty much it. If you want, you can also apply a sealer on top, either another coat of Mod Podge or some Duraclear to make it nice and durable. Now, of course, we need some more festive elements to put into our tray. So I'm taking this napkin and just trimming out the tree shape using a bit of water on a paintbrush, or you can use a water pen. And we're going to dress up this plain mason jar. I'm simply putting on some Mod Podge on the side, and then we'll place our napkin tree right on there. And I'm going to repeat that to cover around all 4 sides of the jar. If you prefer, you can also use the iron-on method on glass, and it works exactly the same. You just apply your Mod Podge, let it dry, and then place your design over top and iron it with a little mini iron. So now that we've decoupaged the tree all the way around, we're just going to fill this jar with some faux florals. I have some reds and greenery. You could also add some twinkle lights in there, but this makes just a beautiful little vase. For the third element of our little tray, display, we're going to make a mini tree from some terracotta pots. I have two slightly different sized pots, one a little bit bigger than the other, and we're going to start by painting both of them white and then simply gluing the smaller one on top of the larger one. We have another video where I made a set of 3 even larger trees that looked really adorable, but for this one we're going to keep it simple with a white background and then just these green almost leaf shapes. It's just kind of a line and then some little ones to the side. And to finish it off, we added this crystal knob to the top. So pretty and simple.
We used some driftwood pieces as the foundation for this simple Christmas craft idea. After arranging the driftwood and securing the pieces together with some paint sticks and glue, I dry brushed the front side with white paint. Next, I cut up strips of this festive fabric into 1-inch wide pieces and then glued them on, starting at the top and working downwards to create a triangular tree shape. I simply twisted and pinched the fabric and glued it to the driftwood as I went along. I used another piece to create a trunk for the tree and then added a starfish sprinkled with some diamond dust to the top. Finally, I added some nautical rope for hanging. I love how this rustic Christmas craft turned out, a unique, one-of-a-kind piece of decor for the holidays.
So please, Santa, bring back my love.
If you have an old picture frame, consider this faux stained glass technique. I made this beautiful nativity scene and gifted it to my mother-in-law for Christmas last year, and just want to show you how you can make one yourself. So these transfers and the cutouts came from Chalk Couture, and I'll link everything below, but there's green mesh transfers that create these really beautiful designs. I first started by painting the frame itself, and because the mat was a fabric mat, I applied a coat of Mod Podge over the whole thing to seal it in. Otherwise, it just keeps soaking in the paint and then you can never get that full coverage. While the Mod Podge was drying, I continued on to the other pieces. So this wood cutout comes perfectly sized to the shape of the stencil, and I decided to paint it a navy blue as a background. So I had to mix a little bit of this blue and black that I had in my collection. These are just acrylic paints. I used that darker blue to paint the areas for the Mary and Joseph figures, and then a little bit of a lighter shade of blue for where the Jesus figure was going to go. After drying the paint, I applied a little bit of wax to make sure that my stencil's not going to pull my paint up off of the surface, and then went to apply the stencil over top. Since it's the first time I was using this stencil, I wanted to defuzz it to make it a little less sticky, again, so that it wouldn't rip the paint off of my painted surface when the time came. So it has these fuzzing cloths that you just put your stencil over top of, and it helps to take the stickiness down a bit. After placing the stencil in the right spot, I used some of this gold chalk paste and chalked over the stencil to create this beautiful design. I like the combination of the navy blue with the gold. It looks so rich and elegant. And while that paste is still wet, you want to pull it off and then dry your paste on there. Now these stencils are reusable. Ideally you want to wash it as soon as you've used it to remove the paste that's in the mesh, but we want to use the rest of this stencil as well for this craft. So I've placed the stencil on top of the glass from the frame, and I'm just using some of the black paste to transfer the design for the stained glass over the entire surface. And again, you want to apply the paste, and while it's still wet, lift up that transfer, and it reveals the beautiful design underneath. Look how intricate this is. So some other techniques, if you don't want to use the Chalk Couture stencils, would be if you have a Cricut, you could find a design on Cricut Design Space and put this type of pattern down with vinyl, or maybe find a printout and you could trace the black from your printout. But after we've put the design on there from the back side, so I flipped over the glass panel once the ink was dry, I'm just taking some stained glass type colors of acrylic paint and painting over various random parts of my design. I use these jewel tones like yellow, teal, blue, purple, orange, and red, and it just created such a beautiful color combination for this craft. So once my stained glass was done, I went back to that frame and painted it a coat of white chalky paint all the way around. The frame had these raised gold lines around there, so I just took a paper towel and wiped my white chalk paint off of there to reveal that gold design. I really like the look of this frame from dark to light. Even if you're not doing the stained glass effect, if you find frames at the thrift store that just don't match, you can always paint them to create them a more adhesive kind of gallery display. Okay, so now we're going to put our glass panel back into the frame, and from the front we're gluing on that nativity scene, and finally I glued some lights onto the back, these twinkle lights, just because we want to have that light coming through as it is meant to be a stained glass display.
Santa, I'm smiling but feeling empty inside, 'cause all of the presents are still by the tree. They don't mean a thing till he's here with.
Cutting boards are one of my favorite surfaces to craft adorable signs onto. This one I picked up at the dollar store, but you can easily find them at the thrift store. I envisioned a colorful candy cane design for this piece and started by applying a coat of white school glue to the whole thing because I was hoping that it would kind of crackle as well. And then next I just brushed on random stripes of white, red, and green paint in different widths all the way down the board. After drying, I just took a bit of sandpaper and sanded some of those edges together to make them blend a bit. And then I cut out a little truck shape from some cardboard paper. I'd traced out a template from just white paper and then used that to cut out the shape from the cardboard. I also cut out some wheels and then another piece for the front of the truck to give this kind of a layered effect. I painted the truck red and the wheels black, and then separated the top layer of the extra piece that I had cut out to reveal the corrugation underneath. This always gives such a fun, like, metallic texture to a piece. So you can either spray the top layer of the cardboard and let it get wet and then it peels right off, or you can peel it off and take a bit of time to work it through. But I did paint that the same color of red and then layered that over this part of the truck. At this point, I went back to my board and stenciled on there Merry Christmas with this stencil I had, and then assembled my little truck together. We decided the truck needed a bit of sparkle, so I applied some Mod Podge and then sprinkled on the diamond dust and then tapped off all the excess. I glued our cute little red truck to the board, added on the wheels, and then placed some additional embellishments onto the sign, including a bow. I happened to find this ribbon at the Dollarama that also had a little red truck on it, so I used that to create a messy bow. For the messy bow technique, you cut 3 strips of different types of coordinating ribbon and then layer them over top of each other. So I start with a wider ribbon and go down to a smaller one, and then simply place them over each other. First 2 strands in an X pattern and then the next one horizontally, and repeat that with all of the ribbons from the thickest one to the thinnest one. Then once all the ribbons are layered, you'll just pinch them together in the center to create this adorable embellishment. I like to tie it together with a bit of twine. You can use some wire as well, or another piece of ribbon. And then you can just trim off the tails, either do little dovetails or cut them at an angle just to tidy it up. To finish off our adorable sign, we simply glued the messy bow on there. Added some greenery to the back of the truck for a tree, and then some additional greenery in and around the bow.
I love the winter weather, 'cause Christmas time is pulling us closer to each other. Winter weather, now we can get together. Oh, Christmas time is pulling me closer to your heart.
When I was in Michael's recently, I spotted a ivory ceramic sleigh that is the inspiration for this craft. So to get that ceramic effect on this faux wood surface, I mixed together an ivory color of chalk paint with a white chalk paint just to tone it down, and then blended in there some baking soda. And this helped to really thicken that paint and give it that ceramic texture. I was actually pleasantly surprised with how this worked. I'd never done it before. It almost is like a plaster, and it just covered beautifully. You can see with one coat how well it went over this dark finish. I took my time and went along the edges, all of the sides, and then the bottom. Because the paint is so thick, it did take quite a while to dry, and I helped it along with my little heat drying tool. But while it was still a little bit damp, I took some flour from my kitchen and loaded it onto a soft brush and then brushed over the painted surface. And that helped again to create this softened texture. It's almost like a velvet. Once that was dry, or I was just really careful to not scratch it up, I used some gold metallic paint to paint over the black sleds of the sleigh. I was thinking to do a couple of coats, but I did this craft on a Facebook Live, and the viewers said to leave it, that they liked the rustic appeal of the black peeking through the gold paint. To channel those cozy horse-drawn carriage vibe, I used some of this faux fur trim that I had picked up from the dollar store the year before and just cut it to size and then glued it to fit inside the sleigh. Another option would have been to paint the inside of the sleigh white, just like I had the outside, but because I had this faux fur, it just seemed like it would be really preferable. And then I used my fabric scissors, trim it to size all the way around the outside. Next, I cut down a piece of floral foam and put that inside and used that to add in a bunch of festive floral picks. So I had these poinsettias, these red poinsettias. I had some of this green holly with berries. And then I just continued. I also had these clusters of sparkly red berries and a red ornament. If I had more ornaments, I would have tucked them inside as well. You may have spotted that I had a little reindeer. I picked up that acrylic reindeer at the Dollarama, I believe, and it just seemed perfect to be drawing or pulling this sled. I added the phrases joy on one side and Noel on the other side with a stencil and gold metallic paint, and then a little bit of diamond dust along the edges. This is a bit hard to see in the video, but it looks really pretty. It gives a bit of sparkle to the piece. So just a bit of Mod Podge along the edge and then sprinkled that diamond dust, tapping off the excess. Finally, we dressed up the little reindeer by giving him a gold bell around his neck and a little red nose. For our next upcycling project, we're using this wooden platter that we found at the Value Village for $3.99 Canadian. I started by painting the whole thing with a coat of white chalky paint. Once that paint dried, I applied a layer of decoupage glue over the entire surface because we're going to do the iron-on decoupage technique. So once I finished painting on that glue, I let it dry completely. I then placed on my napkin of choice, which was this beautiful winter scene, and used my Easy Press Mini to iron the napkin onto the surface of the platter. The heat from the iron helps to fuse the napkin into that layer of decoupage glue that we had applied earlier. Next, I used a combination of my scissors as well as a utility knife to cut the napkin to size around that inner rim of the platter. And then I used additional pieces from a second napkin and matched it up to fill in those gaps on the platter where the napkin didn't reach to. Of course, we didn't want to neglect the bottom of the platter, so after painting it a coat of the same white chalky paint and letting that dry, I applied some wood knobs to create little feet for my tray. My mother-in-law had found a whole bag of these wood knobs. They were unfinished, and I painted these 4 white, but she paid like $2.99 for them, and we're using them on a bunch of different crafts. Finally, to elevate our tray even more, I used a bunch of these rings that I found at the dollar store. They're just wooden rings in the craft section, and then glued them all around the rim of the platter. I also applied a layer of Duraclear sealer to help protect the surface of the tray, and then continued gluing on the rings, both with a combination of hot glue to temporarily hold them, and then the Gorilla Glue to really permanently secure those rings in place. The final touch then was to dry brush those rings with a little bit of white paint.
We can hang out on the beach without freezing. Yeah, isn't that amazing?
For the next craft, we're going to use this fishbowl, which we actually picked up at the thrift store, but you can find them at the dollar store. And we're going to make a centerpiece with this. So I really wanted to put on this adorable snowman napkin motif onto just the one section of the fishbowl. I used my water pen to just trace around the design and then rip it out to give it that nice frayed edge. And then because we're putting this on a rounded surface, I just cut a few little slits around to be able to bend the paper when we place it down. Now, if you want a more translucent effect, you can skip this part, but I really wanted my snowman design to stand out, so I painted a little white circle to go in behind the napkin, and then simply added some Mod Podge and placed that napkin motif, the little snowman, over top. The white circle actually just framed the snowman really nicely so that it looks like it's all one piece. I thought it would look neat to spray around the outer edge of the snowman with a little bit of this snow spray, but it didn't dry or work really well in the end, so I ended up just wiping it away once the project was done. For the centerpiece, I scoured my house to find all the faux florals that were either white or really light cream color to put in the snowy arrangement. So I found some of these huge white peonies. I actually disassembled a spring wreath for this. I found some white roses and little anemones. Before I completely finished the arrangement, I dumped in a little bit of this snow, this fake snow, to cover up that foam block to make it look more neutral and white. And then to give the centerpiece a lovely glow, I tucked in there a strand of battery-operated twinkle lights. I then continued adding the florals, including the roses, and some natural sola flowers that I just put onto some skewers and tuck those in there to create a nice kind of rounded arrangement. This was looking lovely as it was. I wanted to add in a final little touch, and so I took a piece of driftwood and first painted it white on both sides and let that dry, and then added on some details such as a scarf, buttons, and a cute face to make a really fun little snowman to go right inside my arrangement. I glued him onto another skewer and then tucked that right into the flowers. Well, I used an unfinished framed canvas for this family portrait inspired craft. You could also use an upcycled photo frame or plain canvas as well. I started by painting the frame black and then pebbles also black. Now I had enough pebbles to represent every member of my family, with slightly larger pebbles for mom and dad and then smaller ones for the kids. This also makes a really fun gift for grandparents. I made one for both my parents and in-laws of them with all of their grandkids, and it turned out really, really cute. We're going to create a pretty crackle on the frame, so I started by applying a coat of white school glue, and then while that was still wet, a coat of white paint over top. And as this dries, it's going to create a really lovely textured finish, showing that black paint peeking through underneath. I used a bit of sandpaper to rough up those edges, again to reveal the darker paint underneath. Next, I painted the background onto the canvas, first by painting a snowbank on the bottom with a little bit of white paint, and then different shades of gray paint to mimic a snowy winter sky. I started with the lighter shades towards the bottom where the snow is, and then a little bit darker towards the top. At this point, I decided that the baby penguins also needed to be gray, because as we know, they are a different color than the adult penguins. So I dried all that and then painted some of these wood cutout snowflakes with the white paint. These ones I believe came from the dollar store, but I have seen them in the craft stores as well. And to give it a little sparkle, I applied some Mod Podge both to the snowy part of the canvas as well as the snowflakes, and then dusted over there some diamond dust. You could also use a fine glitter. Next, we're going to paint our little penguin characters. Start by painting a white oval in the bottom half of the pebble, and then two smaller ovals for the eye shapes of the penguins. Next, we add little black dots for the eyes, and then a little orange triangle for the beak and little ovals for the feet. Once all the elements are painted, we can assemble our family portrait. I glued the canvas back inside the frame and then added on our penguins with the larger ones in the center and the smaller ones to either side. Finally, we'll add on our snowflakes just randomly throughout the sky and even onto the frame. And then add some final embellishments, including these wood beads for the hanger, and then some greenery and a little bow to finish it all off. We picked up this wood angel at the thrift store and thought she could use a little dressing up. I started by applying a bit of Mod Podge to the bottom skirt part of her dress and drying that with my heat tool. Next, I picked out parts of this pretty napkin. It's a winter themed napkin, and then used my Easy Press Mini to just iron the napkin onto the surface of the skirt. After trimming off the excess napkin using a sanding block, I embellished a little wood star cutout from Chalk Couture, and I applied this gold paste, I think it's called Nominee, on there with the little squeegee. Put the excess back into the jar and peel off the stencil while the paste is still wet, and it reveals this really beautiful design on there. While that was drying, I went ahead and touched up the edges of the angel with a little bit of white paint where it had yellowed, and then added on some diamond dust onto the wings just to add a bit of sparkle. So first I painted on some Mod Podge and then sprinkled that with the diamond dust and repeated that for the other side after tapping off the excess. Diamond dust is a glass-based glitter that's really reflective and gives such a beautiful glittering effect in light. Now I glued on that star right onto the front and created a bit of a halo with some gold wire. This is wire I think came from Dollarama. I wrapped it around my fingers a few times and then attached it to the back of the angel's head. To finish this off, I just added a bit of greenery and some red berries to the bottom.
It's falling all the
We hope you've enjoyed all these upcycled Christmas crafts. Let us know which one is your favorite below. And we do have full tutorials here on our channel for other Christmas upcycling ideas, such as this festive smashed tin can idea, decoupaged seashells, and keepsake ornaments from clothing. Thank you so much for watching. We hope these 20 plus upcycling ideas have inspired you to rethink items from the thrift store or things that you have at home and make them into something new and festive for Christmas. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you again next week. Happy crafting!